The shrill sound of the office phone pierced the stale air, its echo bouncing off the cracked walls. Clara sat at her desk, eyes fixated on the glowing screen in front of her, her fingers hesitant over the keyboard. It was another day, another long stretch of silence. Her coworkers walked by, their chatter flowing over her like a river she couldn't quite touch. Despite the hundreds of faces she passed each day, Clara had always felt invisible. Not in the way the world overlooked her, but in the way she had learned to blend in, to stay unnoticed. After all, who could make waves when she was barely a ripple? A hesitant glance at the clock reminded her of the ticking seconds that seemed to slip away unnoticed. Every minute was a reminder of how little she was seen, how little she mattered in the grand scheme of things. The weight of her quiet existence crushed her chest. She'd always thought her big moment would come, a shift, a spark that would set her world on fire. But the fire was always just out of reach. With a shaky sigh, Clara gathered her courage, or perhaps what was left of it. She lifted the phone, ready to speak, yet she knew that her voice would never carry past the hum of the office air conditioning. Clara sat back in her chair, feeling the weight of the phone call in her hands. Her heart pounded in her chest, but no words came out. For all the years of feeling unheard, she had now become her own barrier. The world was loud around her, but it always seemed to pass her by. Her colleagues conversed about their successes, their plans for the weekend, their hopes and their dreams. But Clara, she had nothing to say. Nothing worth mentioning. She had always believed that if she worked hard enough, someone would notice her. But time and again that hope was shattered, leaving her with the quiet truth: no one saw her, not truly. The office felt like a vacuum where everything she said, everything she felt, disappeared before it could even be acknowledged. She clenched her fists in her lap, swallowing the bitter truth. Maybe it wasn't about being heard. Maybe it was about learning how to speak at all. The phone sat heavy in Clara's hands, her fingers now numb from the tension. Her gaze lingered on her colleagues, who laughed and exchanged stories about their weekend plans. The laughter felt like a distant sound, muffled by the walls she had built around herself. Clara had always feared the feeling of being invisible, but now it felt more like a self-imposed exile. She had long ago accepted that she would never be the loudest voice in the room, or the one who commanded attention. Yet today, something shifted inside her, a spark she couldn't quite name. Perhaps it was the quiet realization that the world wasn't going to stop for her to catch up. That if she ever wanted to change her life, she would need to find the courage to speak up. But how? She had always been the observer, never the one to make waves. Clara's eyes flicked toward the window, where the golden hues of the setting sun bathed the office in soft light. Outside, the world was moving, alive and vibrant, while she felt trapped in this small, dim corner. She knew it was time to make a choice, to stay hidden or to take the first step toward breaking free from her self-imposed silence. Her mind raced, each thought battling for attention. Clara's breath caught as she finally stood, the sound of her chair scraping against the floor startling her. She had never liked the feeling of being watched, but today, it didn't matter. Today, the small, silent woman in the corner of the room was going to make a move. It wasn't going to be dramatic. No big speeches, no grand gestures. But something inside Clara had shifted. She adjusted her blouse, as if preparing herself for something unknown. It was time to stop being the background noise in her own life. She walked toward the break room, her footsteps unsteady but deliberate. The quiet was almost deafening, and her heartbeat thudded in her ears as she approached the doorway. She felt the eyes of her coworkers on her, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't care. This wasn't about them. It was about her. She stepped into the break room, where two colleagues stood, mid-conversation. Clara hesitated for a moment, then opened her mouth. The words came out more confidently than she expected. "Excuse me, do you have a moment?" Her voice, though soft, was clear. She had taken the first step. Clara stood just inside the break room, her breath shallow as she waited for a response. For a moment, the two colleagues didn't notice her, lost in their conversation. The seconds stretched into eternity. Just as Clara thought she might turn and leave, one of them glanced over. "Oh, hey, Clara. Sure, what's up?" The words were kind enough, but Clara could hear the undercurrent of surprise. She had never been the one to interrupt, never the one to demand attention. Her heart raced, but she pushed forward. "I've been meaning to talk to you both about something," she said, her voice steady, though her palms were sweating. For the first time, she felt the weight of the conversation, the power that came with speaking her truth. She had made herself known. And that simple, almost insignificant act felt like an enormous victory. Her colleagues looked at each other, then back at her, their expressions shifting from surprise to curiosity. Clara realized then that her quiet presence had not gone unnoticed after all. Perhaps it had just taken a little longer for her to find her voice. But she had found it now. And that was enough to start something new. Clara sat at her desk, staring at the screen in front of her. The words on the page blurred together as the sound of her colleagues' laughter echoed in her ears. She had tried so hard to fit in, to be a part of the team, but somehow it never seemed to work. Every day felt like an uphill battle, fighting for a space in a world that seemed too loud and too fast. The conversations around her were always full of energy, ideas, and plans, but Clara was left behind. She couldn't find her voice, and worse, she felt like she didn't belong in the room. Her pulse quickened as she thought about the presentation coming up. It was her chance to prove herself, to show everyone she had something valuable to contribute. But as the days dragged on, doubt crept in. What if it was all too much? What if she failed? Clara looked at the calendar on her computer screen, the date circled in red. She couldn't afford to back out now. But a part of her wished she could just disappear. A deep sigh escaped her lips. "Get it together, Clara," she whispered to herself. She wasn't going to let fear dictate her fate, but in that moment, the fear of failure seemed overwhelmingly real. The day was dragging on, each minute stretching longer than the last. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She felt like she was losing her grip on everything. Her mind wandered back to the office presentation scheduled for the following week. She had spent hours preparing, reviewing the data, trying to perfect every detail. But the closer the day came, the more uncertain she felt. Every time she rehearsed in front of the mirror, the words stumbled. Her confidence slipped through her fingers, leaving only doubt in its wake. As the day wore on, her colleague Emma stopped by, her voice full of enthusiasm. "Clara, you've got this. Just trust yourself." Clara forced a smile, nodding, but inside, she felt small. Emma had no idea how much of a struggle this was for her. Clara had never been the one to shine, the one to stand in front of others and command attention. It was safer to stay in the shadows, to blend in. But this time Clara knew she couldn't back down. The voice in her head told her to quit, to run from the challenge, but deep down, something else stirred, something fierce. Clara was tired of being silent. It was time to find her voice, even if it terrified her. As the office buzzed with activity, Clara felt like an outsider. The noise of her coworkers' chatter seemed to fade into the background as her mind raced with self-doubt. She had been in this situation before, standing on the precipice of something important, only to freeze. The thought of speaking in front of her colleagues terrified her. Her hands were already clammy at the thought. Clara took a deep breath and tried to focus on the task ahead. She had worked hard for this moment. She had the knowledge, the expertise, and the ideas. But the voice inside her head whispered that it wouldn't be enough. "Maybe I should just cancel," she thought. She could feel the weight of judgment bearing down on her. Real or imagined, it didn't matter. What if she fumbled? What if she wasn't good enough? The more she thought about it, the more overwhelmed she felt. But the idea of backing out was worse. Clara clenched her fists, the anxiety coursing through her veins. She had spent so many years shrinking in the background. Maybe now, for once, it was time to be seen. Clara's breath came in shallow gasps as she walked down the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the otherwise quiet office. The meeting room was just ahead, and Clara felt her heart racing with every step. She could already hear the low murmur of voices inside, the familiar hum of colleagues discussing the details of the presentation. But Clara wasn't ready. Not yet. She stood outside the door for a moment, pressing her palm against the cool metal. Her reflection stared back at her in the polished glass, tired, uncertain and small. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, but the words felt empty, hollow. The silence in the hallway stretched on, amplifying her growing anxiety. What was she really afraid of? Being judged? Failing? Or was it the thought of finally stepping into the light, after all this time of staying hidden? Clara closed her eyes for a moment, gathering every ounce of strength she could muster. With a shaky breath, she reached for the door handle and turned it slowly. The door clicked open, and Clara stepped inside. Clara stepped into the meeting room, the low hum of conversation dying down as everyone turned to look at her. Her heart hammered in her chest, and for a brief moment, she felt like she was drowning in their eyes. But she pushed the panic aside and focused. She had worked hard for this moment. She had earned the right to be here, to be seen. "Good afternoon," Clara began, her voice shaky at first but gaining strength with each word. "I'm Clara, and I'm here to present the quarterly results." She cleared her throat, her hands trembling as she set the presentation folder on the table. Clara looked around the room, her eyes meeting those of her colleagues, some supportive, some uncertain. She swallowed hard, but the words started to flow more easily. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't small. She was finally speaking up. And that, for now, was enough. Clara sat at her desk, the weight of the recent presentation still pressing on her. She had done it. She had spoken up, but now came the aftermath, self-doubt creeping back in. Her colleagues had been polite, perhaps even impressed, but Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she had missed something. Her mind replayed every word, every gesture, looking for mistakes. What if they hadn't really understood her message? What if her quiet voice hadn't been enough to capture their attention? She could hear the echoes of her insecurities louder than the praise. Her fingers drummed nervously on the desk, the anxiety of knowing that what had felt like a victory was still a vulnerable moment. Clara thought about the conversation with Emma the day before. "Don't worry about what others think. This is your time," Emma had said. But Clara couldn't help it. She had always cared about others' perceptions, and now that she had made herself visible, it felt like a dangerous exposure. Was this what she wanted? Was this the price of success? The clock ticked louder in her mind as she tried to focus. One small misstep, one tiny flaw, and all her progress could unravel. She took a deep breath, determined not to let fear control her. But the anxiety lingered like an unwanted shadow, and Clara couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much harder battle. The next day, Clara walked into the office, her steps slower than usual. She felt a sense of unease, as though the air itself had changed. Everyone seemed to be whispering behind their desks, glancing at her with expressions she couldn't decipher. Had they talked about her after the presentation? Did they think she was a fraud? Clara tried to focus on her tasks, but the words of her colleagues echoed in her mind. "Good job, Clara," they had said, but their smiles hadn't quite reached their eyes. Was that a sign of judgment, or was it just her own paranoia? Her pulse quickened, and she found herself retreating further into the shadows of her cubicle. The very place she had once wanted to be invisible now felt like a prison. She had sought recognition, but now that it was here, it felt like a burden too heavy to carry. The idea of staying out of the spotlight was suddenly so much more appealing. But as the minutes ticked by, Clara realized that avoiding the spotlight wouldn't solve anything. She had taken the first step. There was no going back now. The choice was clear: stay in the shadows, or step forward again and confront her fears head-on. But in that moment, with the weight of every judgment pressing down on her, Clara wasn't sure if she was strong enough to choose the latter. Clara sat across from Emma during lunch, attempting to shake off the negative thoughts swirling in her mind. "I don't know, Emma. It feels like everyone's talking about me. I thought it would feel better after the presentation, but now I just feel exposed," Clara admitted, stirring her salad absently. Emma looked up from her sandwich, her expression thoughtful. Clara, what you did was brave. You took a risk. You put yourself out there, and that's something most people never do. Clara gave a small tight-lipped smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I know, but what if it was the wrong risk? What if they all think I'm just pretending to be something I'm not? Clara's voice trembled slightly. Emma leaned in, her eyes unwavering. Listen to me, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep showing up even when it's uncomfortable. That's where the change happens. Clara nodded slowly, but the doubt still lingered. She wanted to believe Emma, but the fear of failure clung to her like a second skin. She had always kept her vulnerabilities hidden, but now they were out in the open. Could she keep facing the world with the same courage? The idea of retreating felt so tempting. But the words Emma had said kept echoing in her mind, keep showing up. Clara returned to her desk, the weight of Emma's words still fresh in her mind. She couldn't help but replay their conversation. Keep showing up. What did that really mean? For Clara, showing up meant facing the very thing that terrified her most, being seen. She had always hidden in plain sight, quietly observing, but never truly engaging. But now, the world was expecting her to be more, to step forward with the same confidence Emma seemed to have. But Clara didn't feel confident. She felt scared, exposed, and unsure. The idea of taking another step toward visibility made her stomach churn. Her colleagues, though polite, still felt like a distant audience, people whose opinions mattered more than her own. Clara looked at the clock. It was almost time for the meeting. She hadn't prepared enough. She hadn't practiced. A cold sweat broke out across her forehead as she opened her folder, scanning the slides she had prepared. Nothing seemed good enough. Everything felt rushed. You've got this, she muttered to herself, though she didn't believe it. With a final deep breath, Clara pushed herself to her feet. She wasn't sure if she was ready. But ready or not, the meeting was about to begin, and she had no choice but to face it. Clara walked into the meeting room, her heart racing as she felt every pair of eyes on her. The space felt larger than it had the day before, and the eyes of her colleagues felt heavier. She set down her presentation folder on the table, her hands trembling slightly. The room was silent as she looked around. Good morning, everyone, Clara said, her voice softer than she intended. She quickly cleared her throat and continued. I'm here to present the new project timeline and key milestones. Clara's eyes darted from one colleague to another, noting their expressions. Some were nodding, others were scribbling notes. She tried to focus on the task at hand, but the fear of failure loomed large. Each word felt like an effort, her voice almost faltering as she spoke. But as she went through the slides, something shifted. The more she spoke, the more confident she felt. The trembling in her hands slowly disappeared, replaced by a sense of purpose. She wasn't just delivering information, she was standing her ground. Clara glanced up at her colleagues, realizing they were engaged, not judging her. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She was making her presence known, and it felt powerful. Clara's world shifted the moment she received the unexpected email. Her heart raced as she read the subject line, immediate meeting, urgent. She had expected a follow-up, perhaps even more feedback, but not this. The urgency felt like a jolt through her body. It had been a few weeks since her presentation, and things had been moving smoothly, but this email was a disruption. The message itself was vague, no details, just a time and place. Clara's mind spiraled with possibilities. What could this be about? Was her performance being questioned? Was she not performing up to expectations? Clara had worked so hard, trying to prove herself, to establish a presence that would be hard to ignore. But the unknown loomed over her, bigger than any task she had faced before. She had shown up, she had delivered, but what if that was still not enough? Her chest tightened as she tried to steady her breath. This was a test, she could feel it, and she was terrified of what it might reveal. As Clara walked into the meeting room, the atmosphere felt heavy. It wasn't just the unfamiliar faces around the table that made her uneasy. It was the look in their eyes, the unspoken tension that crackled in the air. She had been called in without warning, her presentation a distant memory. The room was full of executives, the very people who controlled her future. The silence stretched on as Clara took her seat, her heart pounding in her chest. "Clara," the manager said, breaking the silence. "We need to talk about your performance." The words hung in the air like a dark cloud, and Clara felt her stomach drop. She had expected feedback, maybe constructive criticism, but this felt different. Her mind raced. Was this the end of her journey here? She had worked so hard, poured so much of herself into the last few weeks, but this meeting felt like a turning point, one that could either elevate her or break her. The pressure was unbearable. "We've been reviewing your recent work," the manager continued. Clara's pulse quickened, unsure of what would come next. The manager's words were slow, deliberate, but still vague. "Your presentation was adequate, but it didn't fully meet our expectations. There's a gap in what we're looking for." Clara's mind raced, and for a moment, the words didn't even register. She had thought she'd done everything right. She had prepared. She had pushed herself beyond her limits. But now, everything felt like it was slipping through her fingers. The manager continued, offering nothing but vague suggestions about improving her visibility within the company. Clara felt her chest tighten, her throat dry. The longer they spoke, the more the world around her seemed to blur. What had she missed? What was the difference between good enough and the level they expected from her? Her mind churned with unanswered questions, and she could feel her confidence unraveling, piece by piece. "What else can I do?" she thought, desperate for clarity. But the words never came out. This meeting wasn't just about feedback. It was about pushing her into an even tighter box. And Clara didn't know if she could fit inside anymore. The meeting ended in silence, and Clara walked back to her desk, her mind spinning. The feedback wasn't bad, but it wasn't good either. "Adequate," the manager had said. She replayed those words again and again in her mind, trying to figure out what it all meant. Clara sat down at her desk, her hands shaking as she opened her computer. She couldn't focus on the work in front of her. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the conversation. She had given everything, but it still wasn't enough. What was she missing? Why did it feel like she had given her all only to fall short? Clara felt defeated, unsure of how to proceed. Her confidence, so hard-earned, seemed to be slipping through her grasp. She knew this was just one setback, one challenge, but it felt like more. It felt like a blow to her sense of self-worth. And as the minutes ticked by, she couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how hard she worked, it would never be enough. She glanced at the clock, hoping for some relief, but instead, the clock only reminded her of the pressure mounting. How long could she keep this up? Clara stood in front of the mirror in the break room, her reflection staring back at her. The same face, the same tired eyes. She was used to seeing herself this way, caught between self-doubt and the desire to move forward. She had worked so hard to prove she was capable, but after today's meeting, it felt like nothing would ever change. Clara's hands gripped the edge of the sink, her knuckles white. Was she always going to be stuck in this cycle? Striving, failing, then striving again. She wanted to scream, to lash out, but instead she stood there, silent. The mirror reflected her vulnerability, her weariness. And yet, beneath the exhaustion, something else stirred. Something deeper. She wasn't done yet. Despite everything, she was still here. Clara took a deep breath, steadying herself. Maybe she didn't have all the answers. Maybe she wasn't perfect. But she wasn't ready to quit. Not today. She would keep showing up, no matter what. Clara entered the meeting room, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. Today felt different. She was no longer the timid woman from weeks ago, hiding behind her insecurities. This time she was prepared. She knew her material, and she knew her worth. As she stood in front of her colleagues, she could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on her. The room was silent. As Clara opened her presentation, her hands steady and her voice confident. For the first time, the nerves were absent, replaced by something stronger, resolve. She had come so far from the woman who couldn't speak up, who constantly feared rejection. Today she wasn't just presenting data, she was presenting herself. Her voice was clear, and the words flowed freely. She wasn't perfect, but she was authentic. Clara could feel the shift in the room, as her colleagues listened intently, and for the first time, the feedback was positive. This moment, this small victory, was the culmination of everything she had worked for. After the meeting, Clara stood by her desk, processing the overwhelming sense of accomplishment. It wasn't just the approval she received, it was the realization that she had finally stepped into her own power. Her journey had been long, filled with doubts and setbacks, but today had marked a turning point. Her colleagues had seen her for who she truly was, not just the quiet woman in the corner, but someone with ideas, expertise, and vision. It felt surreal. Clara reflected on the moments when she doubted herself, wondering if she was ever going to be enough. The years of blending into the background, of being invisible, seemed so distant now. But there was still work to do. She wasn't at the finish line. This was just the beginning. Yet, for the first time, Clara knew that she had what it took to keep moving forward, to claim her place, and to never again shrink into the shadows. Clara's confidence grew over the next few weeks, but so did the pressure. The more she excelled, the more expectations mounted. New projects were thrust onto her, and each task felt more daunting than the last. It wasn't just the workload, it was the feeling of constantly being watched, as though every move she made would be scrutinized. Clara took a deep breath, trying to stay grounded amidst the rising tension. It was a balancing act, trying to maintain her newfound confidence while not drowning in the pressure. There were moments when she doubted if she could keep it up. But then, she would remind herself of how far she had come, of the hurdles she had already overcome. This was her time to prove that she wasn't a one-hit wonder, that her success wasn't just a fluke. She had earned this place, and no matter how heavy the weight of expectation became, Clara knew she could carry it. The day of the big presentation arrived. Clara had prepared for this moment, she had everything ready. But, as she walked into the room, a wave of doubt hit her. Was this the right approach? Had she missed something important? The room was packed with executives, all eager to hear her ideas. Clara set up her laptop, trying to steady her nerves, but the pressure was overwhelming. As she clicked through her slides, she realized something. She wasn't nervous anymore. There was no fear, no hesitation. This time she was presenting herself, not just a set of numbers. She knew the material better than anyone in the room, and that was the confidence she needed. Clara spoke clearly, confidently, engaging her audience with every word. She felt a surge of power as she saw the positive reactions from the executives. When the presentation ended, there was no applause, no standing ovation, but Clara didn't need that. The satisfaction came from knowing she had done it, that she had made her mark. The feedback from the presentation was overwhelmingly positive. Clara had done what she set out to do. She had proven herself. As she sat back at her desk, she realized that the journey had only just begun. There would be more challenges, more hurdles to overcome, but Clara was ready. She had found her voice, and it wasn't just about being heard. It was about being understood. For years she had doubted herself, hiding in the background, waiting for permission to step forward. But now, Clara knew that she didn't need anyone's approval to move forward. She had everything she needed within herself. The journey was still long, but Clara no longer feared it. She had the strength to keep going, and with every step, she was carving out her place in a world that had once seemed so vast and unwelcoming. For the first time, Clara knew her future was in her hands. Clara sat at her desk, watching the office around her move, in a blur. It was like a dream, a strange, surreal feeling of having made it. But the quiet hum of the workplace reminded her that success wasn't a one-time achievement. There was always more. The satisfaction of recent victories still lingered, but it was tempered with the realization that her journey was far from over. Every accomplishment she'd earned felt significant, yet the weight of future expectations began to settle in. Clara's mind wandered back to her earlier days in the office. How small she felt, how invisible she used to be. That woman no longer existed. But the future felt daunting, full of challenges she didn't yet know how to face. Success wasn't a guarantee, but the one thing she knew for sure was that she couldn't stop now. Every setback had built her into someone stronger, more resilient. Clara took a deep breath, settling into the familiar rhythm of her work. She had overcome fear, and now it was time to face whatever came next with the same tenacity. Clara's phone buzzed with a notification. A reminder for a meeting in 20 minutes. The schedule seemed relentless, and as she glanced at the clock she realized the past few months had flown by. The work she had done was important, but there was always more to be done. A sense of fatigue crept in, but Clara pushed it aside. She knew she couldn't afford to stop now. The team was counting on her, and her new role required more of her than she ever expected. But amid the pressure, Clara remembered Emma's words. "You've earned this, Clara. Don't forget that." She smiled at the memory, feeling the weight of the journey she'd been on. But today, Clara wasn't just the worker. She was the leader. She had grown, had proven herself, and had gained respect. This meeting wasn't about survival, it was about thriving. And she was ready for it. The meeting room felt different today. Clara stood at the front, presenting with clarity and authority. There were no hesitations, no second guessing. The team watched intently, their expressions respectful and engaged. Clara had earned her place here. The once intimidating room now felt like a space she belonged in. She made eye contact with her colleagues, conveying her confidence and knowledge without needing to prove herself. She had arrived. Clara had pushed through the barriers of self-doubt, and now she commanded attention for all the right reasons. As the presentation ended, Clara felt a deep sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just the success of the project. It was the understanding that she had reached a level she once thought unattainable. This was her moment to shine, and she did so without hesitation. After the meeting, Clara returned to her desk, but today felt different. The work was still there, the responsibilities were still waiting, but there was a sense of peace within her. She had done more than survive. She had thrived. The praise from her team felt good, but the real satisfaction came from knowing that she had stepped into her own potential. There would be more challenges, more hurdles, but Clara knew she was ready. She had earned every moment, every success, and she no longer questioned her place. She had the skills, the strength, and the courage to take on whatever came next. Clara closed her laptop with a quiet smile, knowing that this chapter of her journey had solidified her foundation for the future. Clara stood at the elevator waiting for the doors to open. Her reflection in the glass was a reminder of how far she had come. She had started as a woman overwhelmed by doubt, unsure of where she fit in the world. But now, she was someone who had proven her strength, her worth. The elevator doors slid open, and Clara stepped inside. She didn't look back. Her journey was still unfolding, but she knew she was no longer afraid of the future. It was hers to shape. As the elevator descended, Clara's reflection in the mirror grew smaller, but the confidence in her eyes remained. She had made it, and she was just getting started. Clara stood on the rooftop, watching the city below as the sunset bathed the skyline. This moment felt earned. She wasn't the same woman who had started. She had fought and overcome. Now, she was ready for the future, whatever it held. Back at her desk, Clara felt at peace. The city outside was unchanged, but she had grown. She was no longer invisible. She had earned her place. Today wasn't about survival, but thriving. Clara had learned to trust herself. Walking to the meeting room, Clara felt the weight of responsibility. But this time, it wasn't daunting, it was empowering. She wasn't just part of the team anymore, she was leading it. Her confidence filled the room as she spoke with authority. The meeting was a success. Clara had presented a vision, not just a plan. She realized leadership wasn't just about tasks, but about inspiring her team. Her confidence now came from connection and trust, not fear. At the window, Clara looked out at the city, reflecting on her journey. She had become the person she wanted to be, ready for whatever the future held. Her struggles were behind her, and she embraced what lay ahead with confidence.